Hey Reddit, what was your thank God I looked at the contract moment? Story 1. I signed up for a gym membership on a whim and got sketched out when they initially charged me $250 instead of only $90 for the month. I went home and legit didn't sleep because I was so mad I went through with it. I called and asked the next day to see if I could cancel, and almost everyone I spoke to said either no, it was impossible, or only if I moved to an area that didn't have the gym. I checked the contract and you could cancel within the first 2 weeks, and I was only 3 days into the contract. You bet your ass I canceled so fast. Story 2. My landlord agreed to let me move out a month early since he wanted to lease the apartment to someone else. We had to sign new paperwork to let me out of the original lease and to make me agree to be out by an earlier date. I knew he was a recently convicted forger, so I made sure to read what I was signing. He'd added the condition that if anything fell through with the new tenant, I would still be on the hook for rent after I moved out. I called him out on it and he said, "Oh yeah, I just added that part to protect myself." Then he stole my deposit. I still need to take him to court for that. F you, John. Story 3. My wife and I were at a car dealership buying our first car. The dealership was offering special no-interest financing for recent college grads, and we were using that to finance the car. The finance guy presented us with 2 options, a 3-year payment plan and a 5-year payment plan. The whole time he made it sound like the zero interest applied to both, so we went for the 5-year plan to get a lower payment. The finance guy tries to get us to sign without reading the paperwork, but we weren't having that. Come to find out, the longer payment plan didn't qualify for the no-interest deal, and we were getting charged 6.5%, which is a hell of a lot more than zero. We got pissy and threatened to walk out after we realized what they were trying to pull and got them to come down on the price. I know they pulled that on other recent grads who don't read the paperwork and just sign. Story 4. Buying my house. My husband signed the paperwork and I went in later that day to sign. I started to read through the loan application. The mortgage lender said, "What are you doing? You don't have to read it. Your husband already signed it." I was like, "No, I want to make sure it is what I want." The loan was $250,000 at 25%. Yeah, right. Didn't sign it and got out of there. The mortgage guy said he was going to take me to court. I said go ahead. It would be cheaper than what he wanted me to sign. Took over all the mortgage stuff from then on. The mortgage guy was a friend of a high school friend of my husband. Talked to my husband. The man who tried to sell us on this mortgage got busted and arrested. Lost everything and had to have his parents bail him out. Also, the mortgage lender we did go through for our FHA loan also got arrested for selling bad loans. Do your research. Story 5. Viewed this great flat and was ready to hand over a deposit when I decided that I should actually read the rules they sent me over once again. I had read the one they gave me when I viewed the place and it was a bit strict. In general, I thought it was silly to have written rules when you're paying that much, but again, it was nothing I couldn't handle. Thank Odin I checked, and the rules listed in the email were completely different and included gems like, if you wish to bring a guest to the house, you must put forth a request in writing at least 1 week prior and must be approved by all members of the flat. There will be no guests allowed after 10 p.m. and absolutely no guests staying over. Any guest that comes over will require a $20 fee to go towards water usage for toilets. I'm like, do you want me to pay over $1,000 a month for my own private room and not be able to invite people to come over without jumping through ridiculous hoops? Noped out real quick. There were a few other ridiculous things, but that took the buns. Story 6. My husband, then fiancé, was getting ready to buy a used car that's often used for street racing and rally racing. He doesn't do that, but it's a damn fun car to drive, and is pretty much sure to have aftermarket modifications if it's been owned by someone who used it for racing or as a status symbol. My husband had done his research and neither of us was going to be taken for a ride, and even though this was the car we absolutely wanted, we were prepared to walk away. It was fairly low mileage. The dealer, a third-party outfit, not a brand dealership, kept swearing up and down that the car was still under the manufacturer's warranty and had no aftermarket mods. I was skeptical. I knew that if the car had any aftermarket mods, the warranty would be void for that portion of the car, if not the whole thing, depending on the extent of the influence of the mods. I read every piece of paperwork they wanted my husband to sign and explained them to him, but I couldn't find anything that guaranteed that the car was still under the manufacturer's warranty. So I straight up told him to walk away from the deal unless they gave us a piece of paper that both parties signed that said exactly that. They did it. Lo and behold, the car had an aftermarket downpipe, a really nice one, that had been installed improperly. It was affecting the airflow through the engine and could have eventually caused permanent damage to the engine. It was going to cost us hundreds of dollars to either have it reinstalled properly or return the engine to its original unmodified state, which would give us warranty compliance. Yay. But surprise assholes, we had a piece of paper that gave us a hold in their balls. They tried to avoid us for a week or so until we left them a voicemail saying that if we didn't hear from them in 24 hours, they'd be hearing from our lawyer. That's how we didn't pay for having the car restored to warranty specs. We even got to keep the downpipe. It's kinda spiffy. Story 7. Mine wasn't really extreme, but my girlfriend and I were shopping for houses and we were checking out a townhouse-style condominium. The price was within our budget and the monthly maintenance fees were average for the area. It was an open house event hosted by a retailer, so the property's annual expenses were included in the pamphlet. I found that on top of the regular monthly maintenance fees, around $350, there was an additional expense of $800 every 6 months. I asked why there was an additional expense if there were already regular fees. She responded that the extra $1,600 per year was used to keep the fees low. I responded that the fees are average for the area and many places are in the same neighborhood are already lower. Long story short, it was a nice house, but we didn't pursue it further. I'm on board with the idea of condo fees if they cover things that I would normally pay for, like heat, water, snow removal, garden care, etc. And if needed, additional expenses for major upgrades like new roofs or doors and windows. But expecting 12 houses in the row complex to each kick a $1,600 bonus every year without specific accountability isn't something that interests me. Story 8. I went to a reasonably well-advertised jewelry store to pick up an engagement ring. Knowing that I wanted it to be a surprise and that she would want to pick out her own ring in due time, I made sure the ring would be returnable for full price, and even for a full refund from that store when I bought it for about $900. After the proposal, my then-fiancé found a ring she liked better at a different jeweler, so I went to return the ring. When I said I wanted to return the ring, the clerk said, "No problem, just sign this and we'll get you sorted out." I read the small paper and it stated something very close to, "I now confirm the sale to be a final sale and cannot be refunded or returned for any reason." I read it, pen in hand, looked at her and said, "Why would I sign that?" She took the slip back, got her manager, and I was able to get the full amount returned via the same way I paid, on my debit card. For those interested, it was a People's Jewelers in Vancouver. Story 9. U.S. Marines. I was enlisting for a program that's 5 years of active duty, age 19. Get the contract and it says 8 years. Nobody had ever mentioned anything about that. I ask, and the recruiters point out that it's an overall 8-year contract, but only 5 active, and the other 3 years I can serve in the reserves or in the inactive ready reserve. They explain that IRR means you still are eligible for service on paper, but have no monthly or annual obligation except keeping your address updated, and that all it means is, if World War III breaks out and they're drafting guys anyway, you'll come back in at your old occupation and rank. So I signed. Note, this was pre-9/11 when we had no major wars going on. 9/11 happens, I do 2 tours in Iraq while on active duty, and 6 months before my 8 years is up, I get involuntarily recalled and sent to Afghanistan for 6 months. Story 10. I just bought a used car and my wife and I had to bring our newborn. She hadn't pooped all day, and I knew from her doing it the day earlier that a monster shit was brewing. Well, it happened in the finance office and she shit all over me. Now, just before this, we talked about the $250 cancellation option, how I didn't want it, and how I sold cars in the past. We had a good conversation about it. Well, this jabroni gives my wife a digital paper to sign to reject it, and zooms in to help her sign, but is really obscuring the fact that he had her sign for it. After I emerged from the bathroom, covered in watered down shit, I read the whole long form and caught it. He pretended not to know what the charge was, then he said it will take hours to manually redo. I told him to get to it. It didn't take hours. I didn't know about the signature until after I got home because he gave me a digital copy of that on a USB drive. When I got home and looked over the digital part of the contract, I was floored to see and put together what happened. This asshat saw us struggling with our new baby and thought he could steal $250 from us to pad the back end. Story 11. First time renter here. Moved out of my university residence to get my own place so I could take my family cat. Found a nice little apartment for cheap downtown and intended to move in with a roommate or two to split the cost. Close friends of mine. The landlord didn't speak English very well, so although he insisted, "Oh yeah, everything good, everything okay," I wasn't sure he understood what I wanted. When he brought out the contract, it said in writing that pets were not allowed, and the cost would increase for more people living there. I pointed it out to him, but he retorted to the effect of, "I use this contract for all tenants. Those rules don't apply to you." Bull. I told him I wasn't signing unless he rewrote the contract, but he refused, saying he wasn't going to waste time pandering to paranoid people. I offered to write the contract myself and was baffled that he agreed to it, so I wrote up my own contract with super lenient conditions, making sure to protect my own ass. Had a lawyer look at it and notarize it, and now I live with my cat and roommates at the original cost. Story 12. We bought a new RV and received a coupon for 3 free nights at a luxury RV campground park. Of course, to receive the free nights, we had to sit down with the salespeople trying to sell us a membership first. My ex was very gullible and gobbled up the free cookies and sales pitch after they showed us beautiful photos of the campgrounds all over the state. There were many promises made of ocean views, clubhouses, swimming pools, etc. I was young, and he was definitely the one in charge at the time, so the next thing I know, the 3 free nights turned into a full-blown membership with extremely pricey annual fees. But now we can camp anywhere, anytime, right? We head out that weekend to the dedicated property for the free nights, and it's an absolute shithole. There is no ocean view, the pool is covered in scum, and the clubhouse has the smell of a mismanaged senior home with 3 residents staring at us oddly. Basically, it's a gravel-lined trailer park for people who live in their RVs. I'm pissed. The kids are sad and trying to play on the rusty swing set. We bailed out that night after driving 3 hours, and the next morning, he tried to cancel. They had told us we could cancel any time. Yeah, right. After rereading the contract, this was a lifetime membership and you could not cancel it without following their exact fine print instructions of cancellation via certified mail written in the blood of your firstborn. It also had to be done within 48 hours of signing. These assholes send people away for 3 days to a dump, so when you come back, you're contracted for life like a timeshare. Lucky for us, my bitch fit got us home within 24 hours, wrote up their ridiculous demands for cancellation, and booyah'd right out of there. Then they tried not to refund us despite it all, and I threatened them with litigation, so they finally did. I have a scathing Yelp review about them that gets regular votes for being useful and funny. They recently tried to get it removed, and failed. Suck it, you dirty, rotten leeches. Story 13. Looked at renting a house about 7 years ago, and the homeowner had inserted some of her own clauses into the standard tenancy agreement. Now, this is absolutely fine to do, but they were purposefully put into different sections of the document. So if you read the part detailing the security deposit, you wouldn't see her additions as she put them in another area on the paperwork. One clause was that no footwear of any kind can be worn inside the property. Failure to adhere to this will mean the whole property's carpeting must be professionally cleaned. Another was the waiving of the mandatory notice period before the homeowner can come by and inspect the property. There's supposed to be a minimum amount of time they must give you notice-wise before they can come over unless there is a serious property fault, leak, etc. So that they can't just turn up unannounced. She wanted that waived so she could check we were treating her property right, and if we weren't, would be immediately evicted. I also caught her telling a relative that she registers eviction proceedings upon the start of the tenancy so she can evict them as soon as she decides they've broken her rules. There was a mandatory waiting period between the commencement of eviction proceedings and being able to actually get enforcement officers to evict a tenant. Not sure of the current rules on this anymore, as I don't have as much to do with rental properties now. Noped out of that house really quick and got a much bigger, cheaper house, albeit more of a death trap, a few streets away. Story 14. Had a company I worked for bought by another. The handover included new contracts for all staff with the new owners. I went through every word, and glad I did, as one clause gave the new owners right over any pants I had ever had. Like if I had a pant from before I even worked for the previous company, I was signing away all rights to it to the new owners without any compensation. This included if they ever moved into a new area of business. So if I suddenly got successful in another field outside of work time and had nothing to do with their business, they were allowed to just start a new field of endeavor and take everything from me. I'm extra glad I did check because they later proved to be deceitful and dishonest. Kept on changing our salary payments, super contributions, accidentally forgetting to pay us, and all sorts of stupid stuff. Story 15. Bit long but satisfying, to me at least. Was leasing with a big apartment company where I had a garage along with my apartment. The lease contracts they cook up are 20 plus pages long and naturally slanted heavily in their favor. They use them as clubs against their tenants. Generally scummy behavior all around. They removed the restricted access gates because they were tired of maintaining them and kept advertising it anyway. So the contract comes up for renewal and they of course raise their rent in both the apartment and the garage, counting on inertia to keep me there even though they're blatantly advertising a lower rate in the same model for new leases. Now at this point, I'm planning on leaving in a year anyway to buy my house, so I swallowed it and tell them to write up the contract for me to review. I sit down and read the thing, and notice they've clearly left the garage fee off the contract, even though it's noted as being leased. I bite my tongue and read it over, and yes, according to the paperwork, the sum total of everything was the price of just the apartment. The total is less than what I paid the previous year. I signed it, fully expecting to hear back that they made a mistake before the property manager countersigns it. A few days later, I get my fully executed contract on my doorstep. Now the fun begins. I wait until the bill shows up on their payment website and call them up saying, there seems to be some mistake. You're charging me $5,000 when my lease is for $4,000. Please correct. They tell me they'll review it. A couple of days later, they call to say, oh, it's just a mistake in the paperwork. You can either pay the full amount or we can take the garage off your lease. Oh, no. My contract clearly states the apartment and the garage is this price. Please correct your billing. I paid them the amount owed per the contract on the 1st. Now comes the threats, eviction, delinquent payment, going to affect credit, corporate lawyers. Luckily, I have prepaid legal services through my work. I call up the lawyer they refer me to and send off the contract. He calls me back the next day and says, you're absolutely right. They don't have a leg to stand on here. Get their attorney to provide you in writing what they believe their legal basis is for demanding more than what's in the contract, and I'll take care of it. My favorite line in contracts like this is how they clearly state that it is the entirety of the agreement, so there's no chance of slipping and things on either side. The property manager calls me to come visit her in the office the same day and says she reviewed it with their attorney, and he believes they're in the right because of generally advertised pricing or some other such nonsense. She also implied that the person who wrote the contract was in danger of losing their job because of the issue, as if she wasn't more liable for it for signing off on it. This is where I get to tell her I've also retained legal services and passed on what he said. The look on her face was priceless. She told me she'd take it back to them. End of story. I received a very terse note dropped on my doorstep a day later saying they'd remove the extra charge from my account. I'm happily living in my new house for 4 years now, but that still gives me a warm glow when I remember it. Story 16. We were getting ready to move from the US Midwest to one of the US Island Territories back in 2000. We had 5 cell phones that I was going to have to cancel, and I was looking at some hefty cancellation fees. Then I remembered a clause, not in the contract, but that was printed on our bill a month or two earlier. Previously, they had not charged per minute rates for calls if they were automatically forwarded from the cell number to another number. I had mine set up to transfer to my landline. The notice had 2 important points. First, they would now charge for the duration of the call even if it was forwarded. Second, if I didn't agree to those terms, I could terminate the contract with no penalties. Remembering that I saw that saved me almost $1,000 in termination fees. I was prepared for a hassle when I contacted them, but the termination went smoothly. Story 17. 2 years ago, I went to buy a used car. I really liked it. Test drove it twice and went in for the paperwork. They ran the numbers and gave me the paperwork to review. I busted out my phone and started doing the math on it using one of those websites that calculate auto financing and interest for you. I did the math with the website and on my own 3 separate times while they stared me down. The numbers didn't add up. Turns out they had set it up the payments wouldn't officially kick in until 60 months, but would still be accruing interest that entire time. Screw that. That and the fact that I caught the salesman lying to me on all kinds of things like, this unused space behind the engine is specifically so if you're in a crash, there will be room for it so it won't hit you. No, jackass. It's a low-end model with a tiny engine. Don't try and sell this as a safety feature. Ugh. Anyways, walked out from them and got a lot of passive-aggressive and even threatening texts in the following days. Screw them.